Welcome to our presentation. I'm Scarlett. Today we are going to talk about can the way work is organized and rewarded limit the effects of stigma or dirtiness associated with the work. I will introduce the knowledge about dirty work. Dirty work can be divided into three types. First one, physically. For example, garbage collectors, and the second one, socially. For example, audition counselors, and moral dirty work, such as exotic dancers, stigmatized occupations have in common, implying that dirty work is a relatively monolithic construct. There are differences between these three forms of dirty work. Is how occupational members collectively attempt to counter the particular stigma associated with each. In addition, the largest difference are between moral and others too. Physical and social dirty work tend to be more necessary than evil. It would be more evil than necessary. In the factory management, according to Ackroyd and Crowdy, slaughter workers reproduced this force as collected together to form a tight-knit work group. One of the ways in which the slaughtermen displayed membership of this group was through exhibiting indifference towards the blood mess and the smells of the factory. They worked hard and did their fair share of the heavy manual work involved. They argued that the factory management allowed the slaughtermen to work as an autonomous group to make life easier for themselves. Hence, the men self-regulated and watched each other, thereby ensuring that the work was along quickly and well. There was little need for managerial interference. Farm stock is a large food processor. It supplies chicken to food retailers and food service distributors in Britain, also other parts of Europe. Farm stock employs over 7,000 managers, technologists, and operations across the UK and Ireland, and approximately 1,000 are employed at the factory. The key research question in Hamilton and Maccabee's article is whether or not a strong team culture exists or emerged at farm stock to help workers to cope with the potential dirty work of slaughtering. A large factor in this team culture gender, according to Ackroyd and Crowdy, argues that the abattoir was a highly masculine because the environment involves heavy physical work. Asherforth argues that the stigma of dirtiness often fosters relatively strong occupational and work group culture. They observed the behavior states that have little to do with technological factors. Also, managerial control was considered as unproblematic due to the strong team culture and absence of resistance. With the research at farm stock also found there are also some clearly contrasts between these findings. It was not only lack of clearly masculine identity or group culture in the research, also have stated other findings, but also the importation of different ethical, different expectations of the wage-effort bargain. The initial observations support the general principle, the nature and the efficiency of managerial control. It can't be understood outside the wide market. They also suggest that it is misguided regarding workers in the meat industry as dirty workers in exactly the same way.
Now we will discuss other dirty workers is different. For example, this broad range of roller substances, the Hooker's early definition of dirty worker as physically, socially, or morally tainted tasks. According to researchers, the boundaries between the physical, social, and moral dimensions are inherently fused, and many occupations appear to be tainted on multiple dimensions. an argument that applies to the meat inspectors, vets, and production line workers at farm stoker. All these workers were physically and morally tainted on some level because their work was associated with death, and in the case of those working on the land, it involved not only the killing but also the routine dismemberment of dead animals. It appears that killing on an industrial scale is designed to wash away the taint of such work. Perhaps the industrialist nature of the process enables those employed in this industry to disassociate or distance themselves from the honor and the stigma of what they are doing yet. In listening to those that they spoke to in the factory, they noted that the dirty work of slaughtering went deeper than the physical contact with dead animal bodies. It seemed that working lives were dominated by perfumery as opposed to group concerts, and this, at least partly, reflects the itinerant nature of the workforce. The lack of group cohesion may help to explain the instances of conflicts and resistance. The above conversation between two meat inspectors illustrates the type of resistance we observed on the shop floor at Farm Stoker, and the workers found ways to reduce burden by playing tricks on each other, and in research, they told jokes, whereas in this case, the employees simply reduced their worker effort to avoid the more boring jobs. Engaging in go-slow tactics to avoid trusting was something that relied less upon language than other, more embodied mode of resistance. Bobby and Trevor, who is the manager of production, then discussed the importance of keeping the staff motivated by keeping them active, and this reflects the boring nature of the work. And Trevor indicated that workers must be kept busy because the work is very mundane and they are not occupied at all times. Then their minds start thinking. Researchers refer to slaughterhouses as dirty work, and this type of work varies considerably depending on the scale and the type of production and the nature of the products being slaughtered. The small scale of red meat production in comparison to the extensive, heavily engineered production line of the chicken factory produce a very different work experience for those involved. Something which differentiates our study from more recent accounts. Such work also varies significantly between different groups of workers within this factory. Not all dirty work is synonymous with a strong occupational or work group culture. At Farm Stoker, such cohesion is disrupted by the language barriers, the strict zones of the factory floor, and the regimented and routine nature of the production process itself. In this case, economics appeared to be more significant in terms of establishing positive self-definitions than the worker group or indeed masculinity, despite trusting being demanded by its association with women. Although the worker was largely characterized by consent, there were still instances of resistance and so. Overall, this highlights that there are considerable differences in terms of the experience, subjectivity, and cultures of slaughtering as a form of dirty work.
The identity literature suggests that the stigma of dirty work threatens the ability of occupational members to construct an esteem-enhancing social identity. However, research indicates that the impact of social perception of dirtiness is reduced by a kind of defense mechanism, which means a wide variety of occupations indicates that people performing dirty work tend to retain relatively high occupational esteem and pride. The research tried to focus dirty work on group level instead of individual level. The dirty work can be divided by physical, social, and moral intent, and it can also be divided by occupational prestige. As the picture shows, it can be seen that the miner is relatively low occupational prestige of physical dirtiness, and the dentist is relatively high occupational prestige of physical dirtiness. Although both high and low prestige occupations are faced with the challenge of constructing an esteem-enhancing identity, our analysis will focus more on relatively low prestige occupations, because the low prestige occupational workers are looking for status shield to protect them from the social attack of others to gain an esteem-enhancing identity. Before I introduce proportion 1, I want to introduce some definitions. The first is self-definition and social validation. Self-definitions are important because they help situate individuals in the context and thereby suggest what to do, think, and even feel. Normally, individuals have a strong desire to view their self-definitions in positive terms in order to enhance their self-esteem. Individuals come to see themselves somewhat through the eyes of others and construct more or less stable self-definition and a sense of self-esteem. Thus, social validation sharpens and strengthens self-definitions and self-esteem. Before dirty workers enter their occupations, they have the same view about dirty work due to the social influence. After they enter their occupations, the influence of popular culture remains essentially inescapable. For example, when we meet a stranger, we often ask what she or he does, and we expect to be asked the same question. So job titles serve as prominent identity badges. Thus, the salience of social perceptions of dirtiness would undermine individuals' attempts to identify with their work role. That is, to willingly define themselves as at least partly on the basis of occupational identity. However, according to Jack Bowles' research, two-thirds of his sample of prison guards agreed with the statement that people are more sympathetic to inmates than to correctional officers. When they were asked about how they felt about telling people what their occupation was, almost half described themselves as very proud or somewhat proud. That example caused a puzzle: how they are able to see themselves as good people doing dirty work, or better yet, good people doing good work. The reason is that the dirty work stigma facilitates the development of strong occupational or work group cultures. In turn, strong culture facilitates esteem-enhancing social identity. Typically, the attributes of dirtiness arise not because of the organizational membership or personal characteristics of individual, but because of their occupational membership. Thus, it is the occupational group that is directly threatened, and it is as a group that the members typically respond. The salience of dirty work stigma facilitates the emergence of strong culture. First, the occupational title and the negative attributions that people attach to it makes the occupation itself salient. For example, intrusive questions implicate the occupational identity, like "How can you do it?" Second, the stigma frustrates the desire for social validation, therefore constituting a threat to the desire for self-esteem. The shared threat helps foster cohesion. The dirty works see themselves as in the same boat as sharing a common fate. Third, as individuals begin to move into a group, they come to view the world in terms of us versus them, and draw a psychological boundary around the group, thus intensifying the sense of difference and separations. Finally, other factors specific to certain types of dirty work may further promote subcultures. For example, inherent danger fosters the sense of threat and separateness to soldier. So overall, according to proportion 2, the greater the salience of social perceptions of dirtiness, the stronger the culture of the relevant occupation will be. However, the culture of relevant occupation may be weakened to the extent that individuals are physically isolated, turnover is high, and the reward structure encourages competition between individuals.
After the everyone of strong culture, occupational ideologies tend to appear. Occupational ideologies are systems of beliefs that provide a means of interpreting and understanding what the occupation does and why it matters. However, due to members' desire for self-esteem, ideologies tend to be at least somewhat self-serving and be shared away group and foster confidence in validity. There are three techniques involved: reframing, recalibrating, and refocusing, which transform the meaning of the dirty work, negating negative attributions and creating positive ones. First, reframing involves transforming the meaning attached to a dirty work. For example, public defenders assert they are protecting the constitutional rights of all citizens to a fair trial, not helping rapists and drug dealers beat the system. Due to the meaning of work is often equivocal, we cannot deny their point, because they do protect the constitutional rights of all citizens to a fair trial, even though their customers are drug dealers or rapists. Recalibrating refers to adjusting the implicit standards that are invoked to assess the magnitude and valence of a given dirty work attribute, which means adjusting the standard can make an undesired aspect seem smaller and significant, at the same time make desired but small aspect seem larger and significant. For example, hospital orderlies says that key medical procedures could not be performed if the orderlies did not transport patients around the hospital. For refocusing, the center of attention is shifted from the stigmatized features of the work to the non-stigmatized features. For example, public defenders do not want to know if their customers are guilty and focus instead on winning by exploiting weaknesses in the prosecution's case. By investing their attention and emotion in winning versus losing, rather than guilt versus in nonsense, the public defenders are less likely to feel conflicted and more likely to feel in control. Overall, according to Proposition 3, the stronger the culture of the dirty work occupation, the greater the use of ideological reframing, recalibrating, and refocusing will be. Proposition 4 says that the greater the one of ideological reframing, recalibrating, and refocusing, the stronger the identification of dirty workers with their work role will be. Dirty workers often are concerned about their relationship with outsiders, and this relationship with outsiders are often a major theme of dirty worker subcultures. Firstly, condemning the condemners and supporting the supporters, given the desire for social affirmation. Dirty workers need to reconcile outsiders' negative perceptions with their own desire for self-esteem. Condemning the condemners involves that the condemned motives, character, knowledge, or authority of critical outsiders as moral arbiters. Just as dirty workers often come to condemn their condemner, they come to more credence in those outsiders who provide a positive view of their work. Dirty workers tend to have selective social comparisons. Downward social comparisons tend to fulfill self-esteem and protect vulnerable ego, and upward social comparisons tend to provide benchmarks to satisfy self-knowledge. Selective social comparisons can also be found between groups, which may undermine work culture. Therefore, according to Proposition 5, the stronger the culture of the dirty work occupation, the greater the use of social weighting will be. Proposition 6. Social weighting moderates the association between the salience of social perceptions of dirtiness and work role identification, such that the association is weakened by the use of social weighting, and it is directly and positively associated with work role identification. Once an occupational ideology is fully internalized and the impact of stigma silence is moderated through social weighting, dirty workers may more or less mindlessly enact their roles. At that point, it is likely that only occasional discontinuities will precipitate a wait for faster identify repair. A particularly abusive client, a certain job opportunity, or a neighbor who asks intrusive questions may trigger new rounds of sense-making and cause occupational members to question their involvement in the role. Thus, depending on the mix of chronic and acute threats from social perceptions of dirtiness and on the utilization and the efficacy of defense mechanisms, dirty workers tend to fluctuate somewhat in the degree of work role identification they feel. So, as indicated by the last proposition, given the negative association posited in Proposition 1 and the sequence of positive associations posited in Proposition 2 to 6, most dirty workers will be somewhat ambivalent about their work role, specifically at those times when social perceptions are acutely salient, work role identification will be lower.
For conclusion, the contradiction in farm stock caused by multiple reasons. However, it can be seen that managers could manage the occupational culture of dirty work and thus foster the self-esteem and identity of dirty worker. For example, managers can fire the female workers to return the sense of masculinity to the remainders. Second, for low prestige occupations, the defense mechanisms is so powerful for group insiders, but outsiders may regard it as ridiculous. From the research of farm stock, it can be seen that the reward is an effective way to reduce stigma of dirty work. Managers can enhance occupational culture by reducing the reward competition among dirty workers or by providing more attractive reward to reduce turnover. Finally, we believe that all kinds of jobs more or less have dirty side. For some noble occupations, for example, clinic doctors, they may seek other factors that can reduce dirty side, such as job involvement, self-fulfillment, and moral responsibility. Here is an example from my own experience. My mother is an excellent clinic doctor in my hometown. In 2003, the SARS virus broke out in China. During that time, everyone viewed the SARS virus as death because no medicine can be effectively used to control it. Unfortunately, Chinese government decided to dispatch excellent doctors to the SARS-affected area to develop vaccine. Doctors have right to refuse, but my mother decided to go. She told me that I'm a doctor and I want to make a contribution. So it is not only dangerous but also glory. This page is the reference that we used in our presentation. This section is about the question and answer. For question 1, as I mentioned, my mother is a doctor as she had more opportunity to touch dirtiness and communicate with patients. Her occupation can be seen as both social and physical dirtiness.
Yes, as mentioned before, stigma is an interactional process, which means people who do dirty work can see themselves as dirty workers through other people's eyes. But after the emergence of occupational or work group culture, they can effectively build identification. Thus, it is the organization that helps them to counter the threat.